It's 6:48 a.m. The parking lot is empty except for my car and the cleaning crew's van. I've got a thermos of coffee that's already gone lukewarm, a spreadsheet open on my laptop that nobody asked me to build, and a gut feeling that today is going to be one of those days. I work in data analytics for a mid-sized SaaS company, the kind of place that calls itself a platform because software sounds too plain. We had about 230 employees at the time, 3 major enterprise clients, and a new chief marketing officer who had been with us for exactly 11 weeks. 11 weeks. I had been there 6 years. I want to be careful here because I'm not someone who leads with resentment. I've never been that person. But I think it's important to understand what 6 years actually looks like in a place like that before any of the rest of this makes sense. When I started, the analytics function was basically a shared Google sheet and someone's gut instinct. I built the reporting infrastructure from scratch. I wrote the data pipeline that fed into our 3 biggest client dashboards. I trained 2 junior analysts from their first week. I was the person you called at 9 p.m. on a Sunday when a dashboard went dark before a Monday morning client review. I didn't always answer on the first ring, but I always answered. My title was Senior Data Analyst. I'd asked about a promotion to Analytics Manager twice. Both times I was told the timing wasn't right. The timing was never right. I kept going anyway because the work mattered to me and because I genuinely believed that the right people would eventually see it. That is a belief I have since revised. My new CMO, I'll call him my CMO because that's what he was for 11 weeks, came from a background in brand marketing. He had a gift for decks. Beautiful decks, 40 slides with gorgeous gradients and words like omnichannel and narrative-driven attribution and dynamic audience segmentation. In meetings, he spoke in a cadence that made everything sound inevitable. The first time I sat across from him in a one-on-one, he asked me to walk him through our reporting setup. I did. He nodded in a way that felt like he was waiting for me to stop talking. When I finished, he said, "I think we're under-leveraging our story." I asked what story he meant. He said, "The data story, we need it to sing." I went back to my desk and built 3 new dashboard views that week, none of which he ever opened. The thing about people like my CMO is that they're not stupid. I want to be clear about that. He understood people, he understood optics, and he understood how to make a room believe that he was the smartest person in it. What he didn't understand was how any of it actually worked underneath. He had never had to. He'd always had someone like me to make it work, and he'd always taken the credit in a way that felt plausibly deniable. About 4 months after he joined, we landed a renewal conversation with our largest enterprise client, a healthcare logistics company that represented just under 30% of our annual recurring revenue. That's not a small number. That is a number that makes your CFO sit up straight. My CMO decided that this renewal meeting was his moment. He spent 3 weeks preparing. He brought in an outside consultant to help with the presentation. He scheduled a prep call with the CEO that lasted 2 hours. He sent the account team a 17-point brief on talking points. He did not once ask me what was actually in the data. I noticed that. I also noticed that the dashboard I had built specifically for this client, the one that tracked their usage metrics, their ROI calculations, their quarter-over-quarter trends, had not been refreshed in 6 days. 6 days of stale data going into a renewal meeting. I flagged it in Slack. No response. I emailed the account lead. She said she'd pass it along. 2 days before the meeting, I refreshed it myself, found a data pull error that had been skewing their usage numbers by about 12%, corrected it, and sent a summary to my CMO directly. He replied, "Got it, thanks." That was the entire reply. The renewal meeting happened on a Thursday. I wasn't in the room. I was never in those rooms. But I heard about it afterward from our account lead, who had the particular expression of someone trying to stay professional while internally screaming. Apparently, the client's head of operations, a sharp woman who had been in the room every time we presented, stopped the meeting about 20 minutes in and asked a specific question about a metric on slide 14. A metric my CMO had pulled from the old uncorrected data, not the version I had fixed. She asked where the number came from. My CMO said the analytics team. She asked which methodology was used to calculate it. My CMO looked at the consultant. The consultant looked at the slide. My account lead looked at the ceiling. The meeting ended earlier than planned. On the drive back to the office, I'm told my CMO made a phone call. I don't know who he called or what was said. What I know is that by Friday afternoon, he had asked HR to schedule a meeting with me for the following Monday. I want to tell you, I had no idea what was coming, but I'd been in that building for 6 years. I knew the frequency of that kind of meeting. I spent the weekend being very calm about it in a way that was probably not actual calm. I made a big pot of soup. I reorganized a closet. I went for a run that was too long and came back feeling like my legs were made of wet sand. I called my sister Saturday night and talked around the edges of it without saying it directly. She said, "Just wait and see." I said, "Yeah." Monday came. The meeting was me, my CMO, and the HR director. It lasted 14 minutes. My CMO said there was a strategic restructuring of the analytics function, that they were moving to a managed services model, outsourcing our data work to a third-party agency, and that my role was being eliminated. He did not look at me while he said it. He looked at a point just above my left shoulder, as if he were reading from a teleprompter that only he could see. The HR director slid a folder across the table. Severance terms. Non-disclosure agreement. Standard language about company equipment and system access. I picked up the folder. I didn't open it. I said, "When does this take effect?" He said, "End of the week." I said, "Okay." I stood up. I shook the HR director's hand. I did not shake my CMO's hand, and I walked back to my desk. I want to pause here and tell you something, because I think it's important. I did not cry. Not then. Not in the bathroom afterward. Not in my car. I sat at my desk for 20 minutes, sent my personal files to my personal email, wrote a 3-paragraph handoff document that nobody had asked for, and then I walked out to HR and turned in my badge. I cried in my car in the parking lot, by myself, with my hazards on for no reason, for about 7 minutes. Then I drove home and made a very aggressive grocery list. The agency my CMO hired, I looked them up over the following weeks because I had nothing but time and a lot of feelings about it, was not cheap. Their base contract for analytics services at our company's data scale started around $180,000 annually. My entire salary plus benefits was significantly less than that. The math was not, in any real sense of the word, a cost-saving measure. It was a signaling measure. It told the executive team that he was making big structural moves. It told the board that he was modernizing. It told me that I had spent 6 years being invisible to exactly the people who mattered. I took 2 weeks and did nothing intentional. I went to the farmer's market. I slept a reasonable amount. I had coffee with a former colleague who had left the company 8 months earlier and was deeply, visibly unsurprised by what had happened. She said, "You know your work is good, right?" I said, "Intellectually, yes." She said, "Let that be enough for now." It helped a little. In week 3, I started thinking about what I actually wanted to do next. I updated my resume. I reached out to a few contacts. I was careful, deliberate, not frantic. The severance gave me some runway, and I intended to use it well. About 5 weeks after my last day, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't immediately recognize. The name was familiar. I placed it after a minute as the head of operations from our largest enterprise client. The woman who had asked the question in the renewal meeting, the question my CMO hadn't been able to answer. The message was short. She said she'd been trying to track down who had actually built and maintained the analytics infrastructure her team had relied on for the past 3 years. Someone in our account team had mentioned my name. She asked if I had time for a call. I stared at that message for a while. I replied, "Yes, I have time." We got on a call 2 days later. She was direct in the way that people are direct when they've spent a career cutting through noise. She explained that after the renewal meeting, her team had done a deeper audit of the dashboards and reporting they'd been using. They found the correction I'd made, the one that fixed the 12% error, time-stamped 4 days before the meeting. They also found 6 other instances over the past 2 years where data anomalies had been caught and corrected without any formal communication to their team. Caught and corrected silently, because that was just how I worked. Fix the thing, don't make it a production. She said, we had no idea that level of quality control was coming from a single analyst. I said, I had good processes. She said, you have more than that. Here is what she told me next, and I'm going to try to say it plainly because even now it has a weight to it that I don't want to oversell. Her company was building out an internal data function. They'd been relying on vendors and outside partners for too long. They wanted to hire for a newly created Director of Data Operations role. They had been looking externally for months and hadn't found the right person. She wanted to know if I was interested. I asked her to tell me about the scope. She did. I asked about team structure, budget authority, expectations for the first 90 days. She answered each one. The conversation lasted an hour and 15 minutes and felt nothing like a job interview. It felt like 2 people talking about a problem and whether I was the right person to solve it. Before we hung up, she said something that I've thought about a lot since then. She said, the person who built what we'd been using, we wanted that person on our side. We just didn't know who it was until the meeting where your CMO couldn't explain his own slide. I thanked her. We scheduled a formal follow-up. I want to tell you what happened to my CMO, but honestly, I didn't watch it closely. I heard things secondhand, the way you hear things when you leave a job, but still know people there. The agency he hired produced a first deliverable that the account team found confusing. There were revisions, more revisions. The client that had nearly renewed, the healthcare logistics company, did not renew. They left. When a client representing 30% of ARR walks out the door, it makes an audible sound inside a company, the kind of sound that reaches the board. I heard that there were conversations. Then I heard that my CMO had decided to pursue other opportunities. I heard this 7 months after I left. I did not feel triumphant about it. I felt something more like sad and a little tired, the way you feel when an outcome that was entirely predictable turns out to have been entirely unavoidable. What I felt triumphant about was something different. The interview process with the healthcare company was 4 rounds. I met the CFO, the VP of Technology, 2 members of the operations team, and eventually the CEO. It was rigorous in a way that felt respectful. They were serious about the role and they wanted to make sure I was serious about it too. The offer came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my kitchen, still in the clothes I'd worn for a mid-morning run, eating crackers and looking at nothing in particular. My phone rang. I answered. The base was 42% higher than my previous salary. There was an equity component. There was a budget for building out a team of 3 analysts in year 1. There was a title that said what I had actually been doing for 6 years. I asked for 24 hours to review the written offer. They said, of course. I spent that evening reading through the offer letter carefully. I called my sister. I called the former colleague who'd had coffee with me in week 3. I went for a walk around my neighborhood that lasted about 40 minutes and mostly involved me talking to myself under my breath in a way that I hoped the neighbors were charitable about. I accepted the next morning. My first week at the new company, I sat down with the head of operations, the woman who had sent me the LinkedIn message, who was now effectively my internal champion, and we mapped out the first 90 days. What to assess, what to fix, what to build. She asked good questions. She let me answer them. She pushed back when she disagreed and said so directly when she agreed. Halfway through that meeting, she said, I want to be upfront about something. The reason we were able to move so fast on this hire is because we'd already seen your work for 3 years. You didn't interview in the traditional sense. You'd been auditioning without knowing it. I thought about that for a second. I said, I think most of the time that's how it works. She said, for the best people, maybe. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just moved on to the next item on the agenda, which was a data pipeline audit that I was genuinely excited about. which tells you everything you need to know about me. It's been 14 months since that first day. I have a team of 4 now. We added a 4th earlier than planned because the scope expanded. 2 of them came from outside the industry and are the sharpest people I've worked with in my career. One of them asks questions in meetings that make other people pause and reconsider, and every time that happens, I feel something I can only describe as professional pride of the most selfish possible kind. We rebuilt the reporting infrastructure in the first 6 months. Not because the old one was broken, it wasn't, mostly, but because we had the opportunity to build it the right way, with proper documentation, with redundancy, with a system that any member of the team could step into and understand without calling me on a Sunday night. That part mattered to me more than maybe anything else. I'd spent 6 years being the only person who fully understood our systems, and I had told myself that was a sign of indispensability. What it was actually a sign of was a failure of institutional knowledge and a workplace that had no incentive to fix it because I just kept absorbing the cost myself. I don't do that anymore. Last quarter, we closed the loop on a data quality initiative that had been on the roadmap since before I joined. It reduced client-facing reporting errors by over 60% in 90 days. A CFO sent me an email that was 11 words long and meant more to me than most performance reviews I've ever received. I think about the parking lot sometimes. 6:48 a.m., lukewarm coffee. A spreadsheet nobody asked for. That feeling in my chest that was trying to tell me something and me not quite listening. I listen better now. Not because I learned to trust my instincts. I already trusted them. I learned to trust them even when the people above me were very confident in a different direction. That's harder. That takes a specific kind of stubbornness that I used to be embarrassed by and now consider one of my better professional qualities. If there's anything I'd say to someone sitting in that early morning parking lot right now, with a job that's quietly taking more than it's giving, it's this. The work is the resume. Every dashboard you build correctly, every error you catch at 11 p.m. Before it becomes a client crisis, every junior analyst you take the time to teach properly, all of it accumulates. Sometimes in places and with people you can't see yet. You don't always know who's watching. Sometimes the person watching is sitting across from your CMO in a renewal meeting, asking the question he can't answer, and making a note of the discrepancy between what she's being told and what she already knows from 3 years of looking at your work. Sometimes the note she makes leads to a LinkedIn message. Sometimes the LinkedIn message leads to everything else. I finished building the new pipeline documentation yesterday. It's clean, it's thorough, it's the kind of thing I would have loved to inherit when I started somewhere new. I'm going to walk my team through it next week. After that, it belongs to all of us, not just me. That's the whole point. I've thought a lot about what actually caused all of this. Not in a bitter way, more in the way you turn something over in your hands until you understand the shape of it. My CMO didn't fire me because I was bad at my job. He fired me because he needed someone to blame for a meeting that went sideways, and I was the quietest person in the building. That's the thing about people who lead with performance instead of substance. They're always scanning for an exit, someone to absorb the cost of their mistakes. I had spent 6 years being reliable and invisible, and those two things together made me a very convenient target. But here's what I've come to understand. The same choices that made me an easy person to let go were the exact choices that made me impossible to replace. I built things that worked. I fixed problems before they became disasters. I documented what I knew and taught what I could. None of that disappeared when I turned in my badge. It just sat there in the infrastructure, time-stamped, waiting for someone to ask the right question. The head of operations asked the right question. She didn't do it as a favor to me. She did it because she's good at her job, and she noticed a discrepancy. That's the part I want to sit with for a second. I didn't get a second chance because someone felt sorry for me. I got it because the work held up. 6 years of quiet, careful, unglamorous work held up under scrutiny from someone who knew what she was looking at. There's no shortcut to that. You can't manufacture it the week before a meeting. Either it's there or it isn't. My CMO's choices also held up under scrutiny, just differently. I think about integrity a lot now, not as a concept, but as a daily operating decision. Every time I chose to fix an error that nobody would have noticed if I'd left it, every time I wrote documentation that only future me would ever read, every time I said, I don't know, let me check, instead of guessing confidently, those were integrity decisions. Small ones, invisible ones, and they accumulated into something that a stranger trusted enough to stake a job offer on. That's how it actually works, not in grand gestures. In the accumulated weight of small, honest choices made when nobody is watching. The resilience piece took me longer to make peace with. Sitting in that parking lot with my hazards on for no reason. That wasn't weakness. That was a person processing something genuinely hard. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we frame resilience as not feeling the hit. I felt it. I cried for 7 minutes, and then I made a grocery list, and then I kept going. That's the whole thing. You don't have to be stoic. You just have to keep going after you're done. Not being stoic. What I'd want anyone to take from this is something pretty simple. Build things that work. Be honest about what you know and what you don't. Fix the errors even when no one's looking. Teach what you know to the people next to you. Not because someone will reward you for it on a specific timeline. They might not. My timeline was 6 years of invisibility, followed by 14 minutes in a conference room, followed by a LinkedIn message from a stranger. But the work was real. That's what the head of operations saw. That's what my new team inherited. That's what got me into a room where someone looked across the table and said, "We want you on our side." That sentence was worth every early morning and every Sunday night fix, and every moment I stayed quiet when I probably should have been louder. It was worth all of it.